Hello, subscribers. I just watched DanDaDan, and I was happy with what I saw. It's not perfect, of course. There are some stuff that may turn some people away, but I'll save the worst for the end of the review. DanDaDan has a great premise to begin with. A boy who believes in aliens, but not ghosts, and a girl who believes in ghosts but not aliens, challenge each other to go to a haunted site and abduction site respectively. And upon arrival, learn that they are both right, and they are thrust into a fight for survival against both alien and evil spirit alike. I will say that the premise could possibly have been done better. I was expecting aliens to work very differently to ghosts. Like to defeat a vampire, you need a stake, and a werewolf, you need a silver bullet. But in DanDaDan, aliens and ghosts work basically the same, and are beaten in pretty much the same way. I mean, they still have to figure out how to beat each foe they come across. But it's not like you can use warding charms on spirits, but not aliens. No, you can use them on both. So that seems like some missed complexity that could have been introduced, but if they had done it that way, it would have changed the story a lot. And I think they have a good thing going here, so I'm not complaining. What I will complain about is the meeting between our main characters, Momo and Ken. It felt very forced. It solidified their personalities, but it did it in such an awkward way, it was painful to watch. However, the show was also refreshing, that it didn't fall into the classic trope of people misunderstanding each other, or a situation because they couldn't communicate like real people. There was one moment where that kind of happened, I mean besides their introduction, but it felt natural, like it totally made sense for their characters, why they didn't communicate effectively, and more than that, them having a moment of misunderstanding was earned because earlier in the season they had a much more obvious moment where they could have misunderstood each other, where they spent half or maybe just a quarter of the episode thinking the other person ditched them because they couldn't find each other. It felt like they were building up to some big misunderstanding. But when they finally ran into each other, they immediately communicated like adults and didn't make a big deal of it. That moment instantly raised my respect for this show's writing. I also really liked the opening. It actually reminded me of another song, but I can't name it. Some sort of Indian song, I think. The music really felt like some Bollywood mashup or something. I feel like I could explain it better if I remembered what that song was called. But anyway, once you start the show, the first thing you notice is the animation. During the first half of the first episode, I was not impressed. It felt like it was lazily animated. Like somewhere in between normal good animation and the purposefully not caring about line continuity that you get in certain big fight scenes, like Naruto versus Pain. But once the two main characters went to their respective haunting or abduction sites, the animation suddenly pops. And from then on, I had no complaints about the animation, and in fact, thought it was especially good in certain parts, like the aforementioned climax of the first episode, and later when a mother is looking for her child. Another thing that makes this anime stand out is its use of a certain classical song. I think it's Charge of the Light Brigade, but I'm not 100% on that. But it works really well, and it's nice to hear it used like that after all these years. Though it is a bit odd how often they used it. I've counted 3 times so far in my viewing, so it almost seems overdone. But not really, it just works every time. The song really lends itself to fast-paced action like this. Okay, I'm running out of things to say to put off talking about the actual problematic stuff. For starters, a few episodes in, or maybe halfway, they introduce a new character who ends up getting psychic powers, and they make her into a crazy person who thinks Momo is a demon, and that she's been chosen by heaven to stop her. And she uses a crucifix, or tries to anyway. Her psychic powers have nothing to do with the crucifix. It might not be so bad if they ever introduce demons as real in this anime instead of just ghosts and aliens, but right now it just feels like the anime is implicitly saying that believing in demons is crazy, but ghosts and aliens is fine. But even this isn't so bad, since it's played for laughs, and I've seen much worse. So I'm a spider. So what? Had a much worse version of this crazy religious person trope, but DanDaDan isn't so bad with it. The biggest problem you can find in DanDaDan is the crass sexual humor. It's not like jobless reincarnation bad, where any of the main characters are perverts, or they're trying to turn the audience on. Except, of course, the school nurse who only has one scene so far, and she is overtly a dominatrix.
Before entering, what you need is some discipline. Say you need. Say it! sorry I have to deal with something, but you're free to stay here as long as you like. Thanks, ma'am.
And before I forget, there is also Momo's sexy grandma. But this one picture is the most scantily clad she is in the season. She's usually a little more modest. But basically, one of the biggest threats to the main characters isn't their lives, but their sex organs. You can see this in the first evil spirit stealing Ken's banana, and the way she introduced herself was very crass, and the first indication that this show was not for kids. But it gets worse with the aliens. It's nothing new that aliens probing people is always thought of in a sexual way, but the aliens in DanDaDan take it to its most in-your-face conclusion. The probes come out of their crotch, and are of course very phallic. It actually seems like the animators found a way to have full male nudity without actually having nudity, and the aliens want to reproduce with Momo. I will say though that they at least have the decency of using euphemisms. For example, the aliens will refer to sex organs of either gender as bananas, which actually works rather well, and although the language can be crass, I don't think it's ever vulgar. But maybe that's just me. There is one scene which stands out as the worst. It's clearly a sex joke, and the animators absolutely knew what they were doing here, but if you can deal with this scene, then there should be nothing holding you back from watching the whole series. Or at least the first season. Edit! When I tried to get the clip, I found out that the problematic scene was edited out. This pisses me off. I know it was pretty bad, but it also wasn't something that made sense to cut out the way they did. Because it edits out how the aliens transformed one of their henchmen, which makes it look like he just naturally has two forms. But also when I watched the show, I watched it on Netflix. But grabbing the clip, I sailed the 7 seas. So why the hell is a pirate site censoring anything? People go to pirate sites to avoid censorship among other reasons. Not only that, but I've seen the Netflix watermark on other shows before, and this episode had a disclaimer at the beginning. What's the point of a disclaimer if you're just gonna cut out the bad bits? Can you tell I'm a bit peeved? If I had not watched it on Netflix first, I never would have known about the censorship, and potentially recommended something without giving very relevant details. Luckily, the subbed version is still uncensored.
給料下げますからね。
それは人長よ無理して
全く世話が焼ける。
それだけはやべ
気が高くやは勇気なしで死ねちゃうや時間戦えますかリゲインリゲイン僕らのリゲインアタッシュケースに勇気の
That is the worst it gets, plus that other picture that I should have shown on screen at some point, and the aliens aren't around in every episode, so it's not too often either. Okay, now let's see how it does on paper. So it obviously has the sex jokes, but I'm much more lenient on it in this regard, as it's not too vulgar. It's pretty clean for what it is, except that one scene. It's not very fan servicey, which is kinda ironic given how often the main characters are losing their clothes, but most every time they lose their clothes, it's more of a joke or a setup to a later joke. It doesn't feel like the animators were just trying to draw sexy girls in their underwear or anything like that. It was just a running gag that they kept losing their clothes for one reason or another. And I wouldn't say it was an overused gag or anything, but take it how you will. Nudity is almost a non-issue, but you do see Ken's naked butt at one point, if you care to count that. Which I normally don't, but the aliens' phallic probes I'm absolutely counting. It never lingers on them too long, and they are of course metal, and not totally shaped in a vulgar way, but it is not something that can be ignored. I lightly marked homosexuality and jokingly, but I'm really not sure. I could be wrong about that part. I don't have a specific scene in my head, I just have the feeling they made a joke at some point, but I could be way wrong. DanDaDan seems to be an action shonen, so of course there is violence. Unfortunately, it wasn't very realistic, which, don't get me wrong, isn't the biggest problem, but all the times people get smashed through walls is a bit silly. Like, I can suspend my disbelief with the main characters, because they have supernatural powers that they obtain. But when normal people get smashed,
darn you
yeah, no, they should totally be dead. So people don't die, except the bad guys, who either were already dead to begin with, or aliens. But not any currently living human will die, even if they absolutely should. But at least it's not like Sakamoto days where they tell you they lived and you just have to accept it. It's clear that these people are surviving. There is some blood, but half the time it's just a nosebleed or something. Nothing too gruesome. It never lingers on any severe cuts. Nothing really strikes me as psychological gore, but it is a possibility, I guess. Isaiah 520 is complicated. Ken does get possessed by an evil spirit, allowing him access to her powers. But one of the big plot points is him trying to remove the curse. Also, there is more of a separation between him and the evil spirit that other main characters with this trope would have. The closest we get to evil church is the crazy person I mentioned earlier. And I think the closest I can get to it, changing bad for good, is that it makes the evil spirit sympathetic. But since they were once human and they died with regrets, I don't really see a problem with sympathizing with them. So I'm not marking anything in Isaiah 5:20 as nothing seems strong enough to warrant it to me. The powers in DanDaDan are mostly some form of psychic power. There may be some minor ritual in some parts, but nothing that I feel justifies marking anything in this section. And lastly, we have the language, which is young adult, but pretty infrequent really. And that word I marked in level 3 might have only been teat, which is certainly not as bad. Also, I didn't mark it, but there may have been one instance of using Jesus as an expletive. I don't remember though. Language feels pretty mild most of the time, and it's really the subject matter that stands out more than the language itself. So that is DanDaDan. Currently, as I write this script, I have only seen up to Season 2, Episode 5. I was gonna stop at Season 1 because Season 2 isn't finished yet, and I like to binge watch, but the first season ended as if it were just the middle of the season, on a cliffhanger, and not the type of cliffhanger you would expect to end a season on, so I think the first season is really just part 1 of the first season, and Season 2 is just part 2 of Season 1. The show is pretty great so far, and I look forward to finishing the, quote, second season. And if you don't find a problem with anything I mentioned, then I can recommend it. 4 stars. I don't think it will ever get to 5 stars, but it is a good option.